Samson, making headphones for you to listen through. Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I'm Michael.
Good morning, Vietnam!
So, just for those at home, Blake and I, before we hit record, we looked each other in the eyes, and he was like, "Can I do it first?" And I was like, "Yeah, go for it."
That is now canon, unfortunately.
Right, and then we both watched a YouTube video just so we could test like how long we need to stretch out the good in the morning.
Yeah, obviously by that take, you know right off the bat we're doing Good Morning Vietnam, a Robin Williams classic.
Yep, and I'm frankly a little annoyed with you, Blake.
Why?
Well, if you recall, so we have this group chat where me, Blake, and Jason will talk about what movies we're going to do next and whatever. So a couple weeks ago, Blake was like, "We're doing a war movie next," and then and then you were like, "We're doing a war movie next." Like, and then you gave me a list of options. You're like, "Which one should we do?" And I said, "Why don't we do the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie?" Because that's like kind of a war movie.
Which, if you're aware, is not a war movie, nor is it a Western.
It's barely even a movie. So
I would accept it in so many different genres, and this is not one of them. So.
Yeah. So anyways, I was annoyed. And then I looked at your list and I was like, because I was in a bad mood because you had denied me my desires. So then I was like, you know what would really cheer me up? Robin Williams.
Yeah, which Robin Williams is like, you know, one of the funniest human beings to have ever lived. He's like the person who was, you know, a constant point of joy for a lot of us as children growing up in the 90s and probably earlier than that even.
Oh, even like his comedy, like it almost like surpassed any generation. Like,
yeah.
I loved him. I loved him. My parents loved him. My grandparents loved him.
Yeah.
Like he had a long career too. Like I was Googling him yesterday and like he started on like Mork and Mindy, or I guess Happy Days, and then they transitioned off to Mork and Mindy, and like he was on TV and he was a famous stand-up and he was a big movie star too. By the way, have you ever gone back and like listened to any of his stand-up specials?
Yeah. I think that's kind of like a point of right. It's almost like with Robin Williams, there's a rite of passage. You grow up as a kid, you see all of the classics like Mrs. Doubtfire and Jumanji and Hook and everything else kind of thing, like those 90s classics. And then eventually at some point somebody says, you know that Robin Williams has more stuff than just like those kind of classic kids movies. And you're like, oh. And then so you go and you watch like the golf stand-up special where he talks about the invention of golf. I think is the one that everybody sees at some point.
Yeah.
And, like, you get into that stuff and then you get like you realize that, you know, Rob Williams is such a multifaceted comedian. Like he's able to do this kids stuff, but he's also able to be like extremely vulgar and like inappropriate and hilarious in that sense too.
Oh dear God. I forget what it's called, but he had he had some kind of like quadruple bypass or something, I think in the late aughts. And then he came back a year or so later with this new stand-up special, which this would have been, unfortunately, like 5 or 6 years before his death. And I remember, like, it's the start of the special. People are still, like, trickling in, and he's kind of, like, engaging with the audience. And this woman, I forget, it's a little hazy, but this woman pointed at someone a couple rows over, and she was like, "Hey, that's my boss." And he just looked at her and went, "Did you fuck him?" Like, it was just so... It was amazing. Incredible.
Yeah, he like one of the classics, one of the greats of all time. I think that the way that we lost him, like unfortunately to suicide, puts like a little bit of a sad note to whenever you bring up Robin Williams, because it is kind of something that you do kind of think about.
It certainly puts like a bittersweet cap on things.
Yeah, like to the end of his career and everything. And like I did read into all of that stuff like while I was doing my research, and I don't really want to get into like too much detail about it, but it is like, you know, we do have to acknowledge it, I think.
Of course.
Because yeah, it is so prevalent to his career and the end of his career and how we all kind of remember him too, right?
Yeah, so. And like it just the reverberations and like it's like the air on planet Earth changed for the next few days after his passing, right? Like I would have been 21. I was in maybe going into third year university. I was just working part-time at this fucking truck stop. And like, I can remember just everybody like of all backgrounds, of all generations, just everybody was talking about it, right? Like
Right.
it was so sad. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And it really just, if I can go there, it really does just kind of really cement how, you know, suicide really is never the answer, right? Like it
Right.
just, it's never,
Yeah, I
it's,
think that's maybe
yeah.
the most like positive thing to come out of all of it is
Yeah,
like
maybe.
the fact that everybody kind of had to reckon with that a little bit more than we have in the past. Like I think, suicide, because of the nature of it, it's something that we as human beings don't really want to talk about. And
No,
like I
yeah.
think everybody knows of somebody who knows of somebody who's committed suicide. It feels dirty. It's just a reality of the human experience, and I think that having somebody so prominent go through that, and how, like you said, it took the wind out of the sails of Earth for a few days. Like,
Yeah. I guess we should just say, like, I don't want to shame anyone who's thought about it or been there, or anyone who's we've unfortunately lost, but it really does just hammer home that it's never the answer. And like, it's really, there is like a throbbing absence that gets left behind when we lose someone that way.
yeah,
So,
for sure.
all right,
For
now
sure.
that we've officially killed the mood, let's get into this comedy.
Yeah, Good Morning Vietnam. So I think that this is a really interesting movie that we're going to talk about because obviously, like, before you even get into the plot summary, this is like a Vietnam War movie.
Yeah.
But for somebody like myself, I've watched a lot of Vietnam War movies, and this movie is somewhat different from a lot of the Vietnam War movies that I've watched, in that a lot of those Vietnam War movies, the ones that have held up over the years, are usually the ones that take place mid to late Vietnam War era.
Yeah.
And they're usually when like the US is kind of starting to turn against the war.
It's not, things aren't looking so good anymore.
Right. And this movie actually starts us off at the beginning of the Vietnam War in 1965, which I thought was a really interesting thing. And I can't remember, and I was going to check this, but I forgot. I couldn't remember if it said Saigon 1965 in the opening scene of the movie.
I think it does.
And I think that's incredibly important to know, like, before you even get into the plot summary, that this is at the beginning of the war. Like, America really doesn't fully understand what they're dealing with at this point in time in Vietnam.
Yeah, and like actually I probably should have looked that up. I don't really have that much knowledge on Vietnam. I remember we only did I think like one lecture on it in my university history class. So I was a little, I was watching this movie and I was kind of like, I maybe should have done some more research.
Yeah,
But I think that's a great thing to note, is that this is when passions are still hot and the Americans still think they're in this for the right reasons.
and that they're indestructible. Like, we're
Yeah.
getting in, like, America at this point in time has this history of just going in and getting things done.
Right, which has has never ever led to negative consequences, and which they've never done post Vietnam.
Yeah.
Teehee, sarcasm. But okay, should I launch into the plot summary?
I think
here?
we're ready. Yep.
Coolsies. So Robin Williams plays Airman Second Class Adrian Kronhauer, who's basically like a disc jockey, essentially. Before the movie, he was stationed on some island in Crete, and he was running their radio program, and then he gets transferred to Saigon to run the Vietnam Air program, and it's Robin Williams. So he's naturally hilarious, but his blend of humor is a little too controversial and a little too, I want to say, spicy for the top brass. So he ends up butting heads with his superiors quite a lot. And things kind of unravel and go in interesting directions from there.
And that's actually something that I do want to note, is that there's a lot of directions that this movie goes in. And I don't think it succeeds at every one of them.
No, not really. Yeah, it's funny. I actually, I think I had this movie on VHS when I was like 16. And I remember watching the first 20 minutes, again, when I was 16, and then just turning it off or getting distracted or what. So, like, I remembered up to the end of his first broadcast. But then, yeah, watching this movie again this week for this podcast, I got up to that point, and then I was just like, I have no fucking idea where we're going from here. Like, dealer's choice. We could do it. There's still an hour and 40 minutes left.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because I wasn't expecting a movie that's so beloved and so, I guess the Good Morning Vietnam part of it being referenced so much in culture. I wasn't expecting such a flawed movie.
Yeah, I don't know. We might be butting heads on this one because I don't know that I found it as flawed as you did.
Maybe.
But I remember, again, like I don't prepare for things. I don't. I like to go into movies blind. I feel like that's how I have my best viewing experiences.
Right.
So I don't really know much about this movie or, again, like you gave me a list of options and I want to do a Robin Williams movie.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I knew is that it's Robin Williams. It takes place during Vietnam and he's a disc jockey. Right. Yeah. So like, again, watching this week, we got up to the end of his first broadcast and then I was like, all right, Robin, where are we going? And then this movie does, especially in the second half, kind of veer towards more like dramedy territory.
Right,
and
which is kind of what I was actually expecting a little bit more of.
Yeah, and again, like me going in kind of blind, I was like, oh, right. It's
because it's Vietnam. Yeah.
It's a Vietnam movie. This isn't fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Characters of people you may know. Obviously, Robin Williams is the big tentpole actor in this movie. The reason why, honestly, he's the number one reason for checking this movie out.
You know what I was thinking the other day? It's like some movies are just peerless, right? Like everything comes together, like the direction, the writing, the acting, the score, whatever. Other movies, like some movies, though, they're sold on their direction. Some movies are sold on their writing. Some movies are sold on their performances, and then some movies are sold on one specific performance.
Right.
And that's this movie.
Yep. Yeah. This is the sole reason why I was interested in this movie was Robin Williams. He does carry the movie. What's interesting about this movie, and we'll talk about this more in the deep dive episode, it is based in some kernel of reality of what happened in Vietnam.
Yes.
Very tenuously, but I think that the character that Robin Williams is portraying, despite being based on a real character, this is Robin Williams, the person who is really shining through in this movie.
Yeah, it's Robin Williams.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
On that note as well, like, I did name some of my favorite Robin Williams movies earlier. I think that out of all of those movies, I would actually, after having seen this one, say, this is maybe the definitive Robin Williams performance in a movie.
It's pretty much, it's funny. I'm a big Community fan. I forget what episode it is, but Abed has that moment where he's like, in every Robin Williams movie, there's an authority figure trying to stop him from having fun.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's kind of this movie too.
That's awesome. We also have Forrest Whitaker showing up in this movie in a much more giddy role than I've ever seen Forrest Whitaker in.
I almost didn't recognize him at first because one, he's young, and two, he's smiling a lot of the time.
Yes.
He's not, this is another Community reference. He's not doing the Forrest Whitaker face.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly it, right? Like, if you're a contemporary movie watcher, like you've seen him lately, especially in the Star Wars franchise, the TV shows, Rogue One, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he does play the scowling, like, grizzled war chief, right?
Yeah. And in this movie, he plays Private Edward Garlic.
Yes. And the name Garlic is a constant source of amusement.
Yeah. Robin Williams just being like, you got to requisition yourself a new name.
Yeah. He was also in Platoon, which I think you and I both pointed out when we did that episode way back when.
I think you're thinking of Keith David.
No, Keith David is also in the movie, but Forrest Whitaker is in both. Not all black people look like, Michael.
Oh, okay. Wow. I don't remember him in Platoon.
No, I did. I actually, and then in my brain went, wait, am I thinking of Keith David as well?
Yeah.
And I looked it up and I was like, no. Forrest Whitaker was in there.
They're both there. They were on screen together.
No, because Platoon is like one of those movies that just has all of these actors that you don't expect them to be in a movie called Platoon.
Yeah.
But I also want to shout out Forrest Whitaker's performance, The Last King of Scotland, a movie I haven't seen yet, but I know my buddy Faraj shouting him out. It's a movie that's near and dear to his heart because it kind of revolves around his family and his Indian family in Africa and like the stuff that they went through in history. It's an interesting movie that I need to watch at some point.
Yeah, we should check that out.
The next character I want to talk about quickly is Lieutenant Stephen Hawke. He's the lieutenant who, like you said, really butts heads with Robin Williams' character early on. He's the one who's most involved in making sure the radio shows go how the military wants them to go. He's played by Bruno Kirby, who has maybe the most distinctive New York voice I've ever heard.
Yeah, he sure does.
We have talked about him before, actually. He
Have
was
we?
in, yes, and Jess did a double take because I didn't recognize him in this movie because this is actually relatively early in his career, or maybe not relatively in his career, but like early in the movies that I would expect to see him in. But
Early enough, yeah.
he was in When Harry Met Sally, and he plays Jess, who's Harry's like best friend in the movie. And so that's where the voice, like I put two and two together with that. He also plays young Comenza in The Godfather Part 2, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. He does, yeah, okay.
It's considered like one of his most like iconic performances, playing young Clemenza, but it's actually this movie that he loved the most. Like he said that this is the movie that he was most proud of.
You know, I was just saying that this movie is sold on one specific performance, but he really crushed this role. Like,
Yeah.
there's something so pathetic about this character, right?
Right.
Maybe we should talk more about it in the spoiler section, but like I actually have a lot to say about this character.
Yeah.
This villain, let's say.
Right. Yeah. And then JT Walsh also shows up, a character character actor who has a very recognizable face, despite me, I don't think ever seeing him in another movie.
Yeah. I was looking at him too, like, hey,
Yeah, playing
you.
Sergeant Major Dickerson. And he's kind of the head of the Air Force or Air, whatever you want to call them, group. And he just has a general disdain for everyone.
Yeah, he actually, I really liked, okay, I'm really walking back on what I said about Robin Williams' performance selling the movie. He did a really good job too, because like he's gruff and kind of intense and kind of just generally disgruntled in a way I can appreciate. But like, he's also a pretty cool guy. And like, he kind of tries to keep things fair, you know?
I don't know if you and I are talking about the same character.
Who am I? I'm talking about like the top brass guy who actually likes Robin Williams.
I'm talking about the guy who's just under him. The guy who's like real despicable.
Oh, that. All right.
Yeah.
All right, well. Yeah, he's pretty good too, I guess.
No, General Taylor is...
Right. Okay, you know what? That's on me, because like you would name your villain Philip Dickerson.
Yeah.
You wouldn't name a reasonable authority figure Dickerson.
Yeah.
So that's on me.
And then directed by Barry Levinson, who's a director we haven't talked about on this podcast yet, but he did Rain Man and Wag the Dog, which I've seen Rain Man. Wag the Dog is like it's also a phrase, so I've heard it before, but I've never actually seen the movie.
No, I've never even heard of it, but apparently Dustin Hoffman and De Niro were in it.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
all right.
It might be worth... I put it on our list of movies to check out at some point on this podcast someday.
All right. Yeah, definitely.
Who is this movie for, and does it hold up to a modern watch? This is an interesting movie because it came out in 1987, right? And I think, relatively speaking, barring I do have some issues with the first hour or so of the movie, I thought this movie felt like a modern movie.
Yeah.
And that the pacing was relatively brisk. We were always moving from the plot was always moving forward, despite there being like a lot of different strands kind of going on.
It all kind of ties home together, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's some like jokes, obviously, that you're just like, oh, okay.
Right.
But that's a little inevitable for like a 40-year-old movie. But
and it's also a period piece too. Like this movie comes out in 1987, but it's like it's 20 years prior to that even too.
Yeah,
right?
That's the other thing too. Is like I wasn't expecting this to be a period piece, which again, that's emblematic of me not doing any prep because this is a 1987 movie, and by then the Vietnam War had been over for like 20 years.
Well, and I honestly didn't even realize that it was 1987. Like I thought this was an early 80s movie too. So.
Yeah, that's actually fair. I was a little surprised by that as well. I thought this was a pre-Return of the Jedi release.
Yeah. I think, like we've already said, this movie is a tentpole, like Robin Williams performance. In my opinion, I think this is probably the best Robin Williams performance of all time. Now having seen this movie, so I think that's the number one. It was the number one reason in 1987 to go see this movie. It's the number one reason in 2024 to go see this movie.
That's fair. I mean, his fucking face is right on the poster too.
Yeah.
So
exactly. They knew what they were selling.
Yeah, and They did a good job.
Yeah,
I feel like this movie channeled him very well. This is peak Robin Williams.
I agree. I very much agree. So yeah, I think that on that note, like I think that for the most part, it's a movie that's worth your time, especially if you're interested in Robin Williams as a person, which I don't think there's many people on this earth that aren't somewhat interested in Robin Williams. Maybe like slightly younger generations kind of missed the boat on, unfortunately, on Robin Williams. But
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that Aladdin movie kind of is like it's still on Disney Plus. I feel like kids are still watching it, and like
yeah, that's true.
I feel like I don't know. I feel like Robin Williams is pretty evergreen.
He's one of the iconic greats, right? Like I would put him comedian wise like on the same pedestal of like a Bill Murray or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Like, people just he is a household name, even like he hasn't been around in what almost 15 years now, something like that, and he's still a household name.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, like not everything holds up in the movie. Like there's some pretty honestly cringe choices. Like I said, especially in the first like hour, there was a few things I struggled with. Like Robin Williams comes off as a womanizer at the beginning in a really weird way.
Yeah, there's this moment where he sees this Vietnamese woman. There's this Vietnamese woman that he's trying to court.
Yeah.
And I'm putting court in like massive quotation marks.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of like, ooh, that doesn't play so well anymore.
No, not at all. And like I kind of understand in a sense, like, you know, there were guys going to Vietnam for that kind of adventure, but
Yeah.
I think that the way it's portrayed in this movie just feels like slightly more bizarre than like, because it's supposed to be like whimsical almost in a sense, and then it fails, and
It becomes a little whimsical later, but
yeah, I don't know. He's just Robin Williams sitting up, right? Like even during those scenes where he's like trying to court this girl, like early on, right?
yeah.
So anyway, there's also a weird like 10 seconds of naked children playing in the first
Yeah,
like 20
I wanted
minutes.
to bring that up, but I didn't know how to.
This is a great time, I think, and where the movie holds up. It just like it's such a bizarre choice that just feels like so out of place. It probably honestly felt out of place in 1987, but it just feels like even more so out of place in
Yeah, I
2024.
mean, Mr. Levinson, Barry, like far be it for me to tell you how to direct your movie, but would the whole movie have deflated without those 10 seconds?
Yeah, like really, like that's
Jesus.
what I know. It feels like such a bizarre choice even back then. And like I looked it up because I wanted to like look if there was much discourse online about that, and I found absolutely none. And I was like, how has nobody ever mentioned this?
I think it's just one of those things that everyone like goes, looks away and then
yeah,
blocks it out.
it's bizarre. It's something that you should be aware of going in. I
It's
think
a little odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I mean it doesn't like it's not even like anything to do with the plot. Like I don't know. It happens, you see it, and then it's gone, and then hopefully
This
you can
conversation
block
is
it out.
already longer than the clip.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. One scene to sell the movie. There's no movie clips available for this movie, and honestly, like I had a hard time finding good clips of the movie. The only one that I found that I honestly really appreciated that I wanted to bring up was it's my favorite scene in the movie, honestly, and I'll link it in our description. But it's the scene where Robin Williams and Forrest Whitaker pull up in their Jeep into a group of the first infantry.
You know what? That's my favorite scene in the movie too.
Oh, nice.
I was gonna say, yeah, this is the highlight of the movie.
Yeah,
So-
I think this is the most elevated scene in the entire movie. And speaking earlier and when we get into the spoilers, actually I'm not gonna say that yet, but it's something that we're gonna discuss in a lot of detail, I think, in the spoiler deep dive discussion.
Yeah, that's one of those scenes that really like perfectly blends comedy and pathos.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that you get the full view of like Robin Williams as a person and what he means to people. Like I think in that scene, like that's really important, and I think that's a big selling feature of this movie. Obviously, Robin Williams.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like overall, like I think that this is a really good Robin Williams performance, because it's not only, and this scene also shows that like there is some drama involved in this scene, the character that he's portraying, right?
I'm gonna crush on Robin Williams for a second.
Yeah.
There is a shocking amount of like tenderness behind his eyes.
Yeah, and I think
and
that's
that scene you really see it.
yeah, and that's ever present like in his filmography. I think like there's I'm sure you could point to movies that have scenes where things aren't in good spirits, like where he's making jokes at the expense of people and stuff. But there's just always like that good naturedness about him. Like I would describe him in this movie as chaotic good.
Yeah, that's a good way. Like Robin Hood, but he's not stealing. I mean, that we know of.
Yeah. Do you have a scene that you want to share? Are you on the same?
No, that's to me, that's my favorite scene as well.
Yeah,
So,
and I think it's a really good selling point of the movie.
yeah, absolutely.
When to watch? I have this as a Sunday afternoon movie. That's where I like to get in, like, my low stakes movie picks. And what I mean by low stakes is in like they're not always the best movies, they're not the worst movies, but it's just something on a Sunday afternoon.
Something to fight the Sunday scaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's
Something to give you some good feelings that you can carry with you throughout the week.
yeah, exactly. Where to watch right now? It's on Disney Plus, and I will say it looks incredible on Disney Plus. Like it is it looks like a really. I don't know if they did like a 4K resolution version of it for Disney Plus or what, but I thought that it looked like it could have been filmed yesterday. Essentially, I thought that this was. I don't know if it was the way it was shot back then, but I was like, you know what? I was genuinely impressed by the cinematography.
Yeah, for sure.
So that is it for the primer episode. So I hope you go and check this movie out. Like, if you're at all interested in Robin Williams, then this is a signpost movie of his, and that's worth your time in that sense. And we will talk about all of its warts and all in the deep dive.
Not warts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.